Alright folks, honest question, is skipping a cutscene a skill? In today's video I want to explore what currently is being talked about in the speedrun scene when it comes to Metal Gear Solid Delta speedruns. And I want to know your insight, and especially also I want to inform you even what it is what we're currently discussing. Let's talk about the instant cutscene skip glitch that people are able to do now reliably in Metal Gear Solid Delta, and why it's controversial, especially right now. So as of a couple of hours ago, the official speedrun leaderboards for speedrun.com/MGSDSE has been opened. The Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater speedrun leaderboards are open and you can submit to them right now. With 3 main categories: any percent, all bosses, and glitchless. Naturally, of course, in glitchless, no glitches are allowed. In all bosses, some glitches are allowed as long as you fight all the bosses. And in any percent, basically you can do whatever you want as soon as you just start the game at some point and it ends at a predetermined point, which normally would be clear. Because if you look at the original Metal Gear Solid 3 here, which yes, I got that steelbook being here, I just want to flex. Metal Gear Solid 3 originally started when you either loaded the New Game Plus save or when you selected the difficulty from the new game screen. And the time ended, of course, when at the end the score screen appeared. Throughout the different variations of Metal Gear Solid 3's lifetime, of course, there has also been different versions that we played, and even temporarily, before the Master Collection became officially announced, we allowed the Xenia emulator, the Xbox 360 emulator, for speedrun submissions on speedrun.com on their own leaderboard. And their timing actually ended on the final input, which is skipping the Ocelot dual cutscene at the end. The reason, of course, is that is the technically final cutscene that we skip, and then on it's just Star Sailor's Way to Fall and the rest of the credits plus Ocelot's speech, where we don't have an input anymore, and only then the score screen appears. So specifically because it's on PC and we can use an auto splitter, we can predetermine an earlier point in the run when a timing should end. So for that Metal Gear Solid HD release on the emulator, we can specifically say, hey, time ends when the last input happens. Let's talk about inputs and especially how that builds into skill. In Metal Gear Solid Delta, time works a little bit different to what we're used to in the original game. In the original game, you can only save via the coded dialogue, of course, with paramedic, and then it would only reset the IGT back to when you made the save. It's a very clear line how save works, and especially how loading a save works, and you even had to go out of your way to go back to the main menu and then load a save that you made yourself previously. In Metal Gear Solid Delta, as many of you probably have known, every time when you enter a room in Metal Gear Solid Delta, a snapshot is being made, which works just like any other save that you would do normally. And that would also then save your IGT and of course all the stats that are relevant to the score screen. And already the timing method that Metal Gear Solid Delta should use is being questioned from the very beginning of the release, because when you have an autosave function and you can quickly go to the menu, load the last autosave and reset the IGT back to the point, technically every run could just be instantly become multi-segment. But what most speedrunners normally would do is a single segment run, meaning you start the game at one point and you just play from start to finish without ever making a checkpoint to go back to that. Now, sometimes checkpoints, of course, work differently in games. Checkpoints could just be a state to where you revert, but stuff like IGT, in-game time, stays consistently running in the background. And some checkpoints, like in Metal Gear Solid Delta, for example, are proper saves that reset all the stats back to that point when the save was made. Even if, in the case of Metal Gear Solid Delta, it's just when entering a new room. Single segment as a timing rule normally begins when you start the game and when you end it, and it should normally not be resetting. Multi-segment is normally the definition of, hey, you can do as many resets as you want while only affecting a certain timing method, for example, the in-game timer that runs within the game. In the classic Metal Gear Solid 3, that would mean you would go throughout the game, make strategic saves throughout the game, and then do the room as perfectly as possible. And if you ever have a mistake happen and you think, I lost time here, you just load the same save again and start again. Meaning the submission of your video could be edited down to only the rooms you actually did to give like one long run throughout the game, but with basically perfect execution, which is the basic understanding of multi-segment. You try to do the perfect run and reset the IGT where you need to correct mistakes. A single segment run would be going through the game entirely from start to finish, and it doesn't matter how many mistakes you do not reset, you do not load a save, you just go through the game as you do, with ideally the perfect execution or the small mistakes you may have happen. So already, Metal Gear Solid Delta from the get-go had a problem with its timing method, due to just being automatically always making a save at the start of a new room. And runners very quickly decided, let's not allow reloading areas, because that affects, of course, the IGT, and that is not ideal for speedruns where we want to go from start to finish with ideally the perfect run based on our skill level and especially our execution in the moment. And the longer speedrun life goes on, from the launch of the game, of course, until the end of time, hopefully, the runs get better and better, of course, get more knowledge about the game, and naturally will lead to slower times of these runs. When the game has a built-in multi-segment feature, that changes the nature of the speedrun a little bit if it were to be allowed, and it would only need the most current knowledge about the game to make the fastest game possible, which still happens, of course, in the regular run, but on top of the most knowledge possible, in the single segment also there's, of course, the skill level and practice you can put into. So what are solutions to that multi-segment problem, especially when it comes to Metal Gear Solid Delta? The basic idea, instead of using the timer that is inside the game, also known as IGT or in-game time, is using the real time. Real time, most commonly understanding, is just that you start the timer, you let it run, as if you were to use a stopwatch on your phone, for example. And it just ends at the predetermined point, which normally would again be just the score screen at the end of the game. So okay. With real time, we can eliminate the problem that these autosaves do. Instead of running through the game and needing to worry about somebody making a mistake and then reloading them, and then hence also cleaning up the in-game time, with real time it doesn't matter how often they would reset a run from this autosave. It would technically just become a regular checkpoint where you revert the game to a former state, which would always be at the start of the room, but the timer keeps continuously ticking. So especially if you decide, I did a small mistake, resetting the room may not be worth it because you would lose the time going back to the beginning of the room and doing that all again just to get a perfect execution of that one room. Real time just in general gives people a good idea what the execution level of a run is. If the real time is very low, then it means you hopefully have done everything you can as clean as possible, as best as you can. In the case of Metal Gear Solid Delta's IGT, a low IGT would just mean, well, you could have done a perfect run from start to finish, but you could also have reloaded the game 100 times. Because here's the thing, Metal Gear Solid Delta does not track how often you reload a room. The score screen at the end of the game only shows you how many saves you manually made. It never shows how many times you loaded a save, which is also the case in the original Metal Gear Solid 3. But Delta, on top of that, only, like I said, counts the saves you made manually going through the codec and calling paramedic. The autosave is done each time when you enter a new room for the first time, and only for the first time. These saves are done automatically and they do not appear in your score screen, which is probably also why in Metal Gear Solid Delta, the requirements to have 25 or less saves for rank 1, or the Foxhound rank if you're playing on Extreme and European Extreme, for example, has been dropped. In the original Metal Gear Solid 3, you were only allowed to make 25 saves at most. In between those 25 saves, you have to do everything clean. No alerts, no continues, no human kills, and no health items used. Only then, within these 25 saves, if you reach the end of the score screen, being on Extreme or European Extreme, you do get the title of Foxhound. Metal Gear Solid Delta, because it does saves every time when you enter a room, did away with that. It does not matter how many saves you made manually, because the game saves automatically at the start of each room. I said another way how Delta already changes the nature of how runs and your performance is being measured at the end of the game, showing on the score screen. Which is why when I posted my 1 hour 38 Foxhound a few days ago on my posts, people were asking, how do you do that quickly? And I said, well, it took me almost 3 hours real time, but yeah, an IGT of like 1 hour seemingly is impressive. But just remember, if you just go through the game and reload the room like 10 times, you will just naturally find the one route you can take through the room without being found, for example, and then it's not really a skill anymore. You just hit the reset button over and over again until it lands. So it's not really a skill. But of course, another factor that also changes how IGT works is pausing. When you opened the menu in the original Metal Gear Solid 3, it opened just one menu. Your inventory, your camouflage, your cure menu, and of course also the general options. They were all within just one sidebar that you opened, and in the original Metal Gear Solid 3, IGT keeps on ticking. You could consider in the original Metal Gear Solid 3 almost like real time. As soon as you start your run, meaning you get the introduction cutscene, of course, of Snake talking about the Second World War, that is basically your start of the timer, and from then on it just keeps on ticking and it doesn't stop. And that includes in your original Metal Gear Solid 3 also when you open the menu, including your survival viewer and your general gain options. In Delta now, there's two different menus of course. The survival menu, which only now holds your camouflage, equipment and cure menu for example, but the general game options and including of course your options to change the graphics, the game settings, new style or legacy style, and also the load function. That's all in a different menu now because there's two in Delta. And that game option menu actually pauses your IGT, which leads to the following situation, which then will also loop back to our instant cutscene skip. IGT goes on during cutscenes. If you were to watch a cutscene, your timer would just continuously tick. But the moment you just mash start and you open the menu, then IGT stops. So you can just mash that pause button until your menu pops up, and then you got all the time in the world to go over and select skip cutscene, press that input and confirm to move on to the next cutscene or back to the gameplay. And of course the question is, how quickly can you do it? Normally, if the rules were the same for everyone, it would just depend on how quickly your platform would react. On PC, seemingly at 60 FPS it's a little bit quicker versus on consoles, and especially on 30 FPS it's yet again a little bit slower until you're able to actually open that menu to skip a cutscene. Meaning that time that it takes from the beginning of the cutscene where still IGT is ticking until you open that pause menu, that may be a little bit of point of skill. Because if you can mash faster, of course, and more often, the quicker you can open that menu to then select to skip that cutscene. And very quickly on the PC platform, we had the Demented Salad help us with an autosplitter. An autosplit is basically just a little bit of code that runs within the software called LiveSplit, which we use to track time within our speedruns. LiveSplit can be very simple. It can just be a start and stop and it shows you your real time that you do. But LiveSplit also can be enhanced with additional parts of codes that the community can write, and then it can read out, for example, the IGT from the game and put that just in a nice little overview in LiveSplit. Of course, LiveSplit also allows to define our own method of time, which we can, for example, use real time as a basis, and then we pause the timer each time a certain condition is being met. So the Demented Seller made a suggestion, how about we start using real time without loads? And he found all the memory addresses that we need on PC to read out the game's internal data, and whenever the game loads, between two levels for example, or when going into a cutscene, then the timer would stop, and at all other times it would just continuously tick. Later then, this also got changed to exclude cutscenes, so technically with this autosplitter right now you can measure your real-time performance within gameplay and within the survivor viewer, but during cutscenes and codecs that timer will stop. Which already basically predetermines the answer to the question, is skipping a cutscene a skill? Well, at least on the PC platform, the way how currently load-removed real-time is being defined, even just starting up the cutscene until you press the pause button to then skip the cutscene, since it's not counted towards the timer, that's not even really skill-read anymore. You can watch 5 minutes of a cutscene and then decide, you know what, I don't want to watch the cutscene, skip it, and that whole time, the time in the background that's been used to determine your performance of a speedrun would stay with the same. This is where console comes in, and this is where it gets tricky. So let's quickly put PC to the side. There, as it currently stands at least, the current method how the autosplitter calculates the time, skipping a cutscene quickly is not a factor. On console, however, that is still a factor. Because of course, with consoles, we cannot read out the internal data unless we do some very weird hacking and try to read out somehow through the capacitor's electronic states what happens within the console. We don't know what happens. We just have visual feedback on our screen and know, okay, there's this stuff happening. So usually when timing speedruns on console, runners, especially back in the days when there was usually no internal game timer running, people just use real time. This is where also a concept called JRTA comes in. JRTA, or Japanese real time, is actually defined not only from a certain point when you already booted up the console and then say, for example, from the main menu you say new game and then bam, you go inside the game. That's when you start your timer. That's basically your normal RTA. JRTA also includes the time it takes from booting up the console until you get to the main screen and from then selecting the start condition, for example, new game. So the whole sequence of booting up the game until you then actually get to the end, once again predetermined depending on the game, that's called JRTA. Completely different concept, but still basically uses your normal real time without any pausing, just like from start here, this time start of the console, until the end point, in the example of Metal Gear Solid 3, reaching the score screen. So in the case of Metal Gear Solid Delta, how would you time Delta? Would you use IGT? We could, of course, use the in-game timer and just say, well, we still want to measure the in-the-moment performance of a runner, so we could just ban reloading. All the loads that you're allowed to do is just the normal ones between levels, but you're not allowed to use any of the autosaves and load back in, because that resets the IGT. And of course, you're also not allowed to make manual saves and load from these, because that also resets the IGT back to a prior point. We just want to know your performance in time while resetting the IGT. A little side note, the IGT actually resets for the Sorrow. At the moment you enter the Sorrow's arena, a snapshot is being done by the game, and when you leave the Sorrow's arena by dying, either going all the way to the end or at the beginning, and then reviving yourself with the revival peel, the IGT actually, from the game itself, is being reset back to that snapshot. So that is one point where actually we cannot even help it. The game does it for us. It's part of the story. Because this whole sequence technically is like a dream, and that accounts even for the IGT. It never happened. So yeah, knowing that, plus what we could do with console, the other method, like I said, could also be just RTA or even JRTA, God forbid. Depends on everyone's favor. Because at the end of the day, that's what it really comes down to. What does the community want? And I still haven't even talked about the cutscene skipping part. Because like I said earlier, we can, of course, include opening that pause menu and then skipping the cutscene as quickly as possible count as a skill. What if we don't have to do that? This is where finally the glitch of today's video comes in. It took a little bit while, but we got here finally. What if the game automatically skips all the cutscenes for you? You don't even need to open the prompt anymore. You don't need to pause and then confirm it, skip it. It just skips it for you. That is possible in MGS Delta. So let's take a look here at the history. On August 26th, 𝐷𝐻𝐻 had this weird thing happening. Basically day one of playing the game. 𝐷𝐻𝐻 just played through the game, and as he reached the pane, he noticed, oh wait, there's no cutscene at all. He didn't need to skip anything. The game just like quick loaded in, and he was immediately into the fight. This was technically an event that happened day one of release. 𝐷𝐻𝐻 tried to find out what happens with this, but all we knew back then was only, hey, this state seems to be permanent, and even if he goes back to the main menu, this does not drop as an effect. All the cutscenes that normally happen and require you to open the pause menu and then skip are just automatically skipped, not even needing a prompt anymore. Then another runner, PGSD here, had the same effect happening on September 8th, just a few days later. Once again, this happened to him here. PGSD was just playing the game here and he noticed, wait, the cutscene is playing in the background. That's why he's laughing here as well, right? Because it looks so weird. Why is the cutscene happening in the background and he just keeps playing? Well, basically the same thing happened here. The game glitched out and lets all the cutscenes be skipped automatically. But the consequence here is that instead of being skipped, they still play in the background while playing until you change rooms. So because you load into the 𝐼n's arena first, a cutscene plays, and then the codec happens, you start the entire fight with the 𝐼n, and he's just yapping in the background. Thankfully, after just a couple of hours, 𝐷𝐻𝐻 finally broke the news. He found out how to recreate it. So on September 8th, just 8 hours later, he says, it's recreatable, it's easy, and it's trivial. And it's a thing you can prepare before run, so it might be a bit controversial. Well, that's what this video tries to address here. Should it be controversial? Who knows? I just want to make sure everyone's on the same book here at this moment in time. So what he found out is that if you skip a cutscene almost frame perfect, and you double press escape, the game glitches out, and instead of being in the pause menu, you're back in game. But the game still lets the cutscene run in the background, as we already discussed here. As we see here, he just starts a brand new game, and once again, after the end of World War II, the World War split into two happens. And once we get to the actual part of the cutscenes just skip all the way through. The only cutscene you need to skip manually are still the ones that are in, well, sepia. And of course, the codecs are not a cutscene technically, you also gotta skip them manually. But from then on, it's way quicker to go through this here. And you did not need to skip any cutscenes except for the ones in sepia too, and I gotta mention that. And 𝐷𝐻𝐻 found that out by basically inspecting the entire VOD from PGSD, and he notices this here. During the fight with Ocelot, he was able to skip it insanely fast. What did he skip? He skipped the cutscene where Ocelot would stand there and reload his gun. And because we're speedrunners, of course, we want to try to skip that cutscene almost frame perfect. So as we see here, Ocelot is still reloading his gun in the background, and we can continue on from here. And what follows after that? Well, that is the instant cutscene glitch. The Sorrow Resets in here recreated the same thing. He played here on console, and he just basically waits until Ocelot does his reload animation. And you can do this technically for a very easy save, for example, just loading into the Ocelot fight. And once that reload animation happens, you just double press the pause button, trying to skip the cutscene as quickly as possible. So there we go, here's the black bars. You open the pause menu, and this is where it's visually also clear that this happened. The black bars stay on top of the screen here, leading the game to think you're still in the cutscene. That's why it plays on the background. But because you're able to play now, you can finish the fight, move on through the game, and for the rest of the game, all of the cutscenes are automatically skipped. And like I said earlier, this whole setup also stays persistent throughout going back to the main menu and starting a brand new run. So you can use this glitch state now from the entire start of the run to the end. Which, just so happened, was done by 𝐿_BS as well. Once he got that state, he just started a new run and uses it in its entirety. And his report is, on console, he saves roughly 2 minutes in its entirety from start to finish, having all of these cutscenes not even needing to open the menu anymore and being able to have them automatically skipped. Unless there's these sepia tones cutscenes, which, fair enough, for some reason that's not the same type of cutscene, but seemingly the one that are the new ones from Delta in the new Unreal Engine 5, those ones are then skipped automatically. We can see, for example, at the end here as well. So, after we go through the game here, doing the duel with Ocelot, normally there's a couple of cutscenes you gotta skip here, a codec call, a save prompt, and then more cutscenes. But with the current situation with the autosave, we immediately go to the codec, just hold down triangle, or for example here, right mouse click, and then we just have the score screen appear. There we go. And that saved quite a bunch of time throughout the entirety of the run. And because these cutscenes are actually instantly being skipped instead of needing to like start up, then being paused, and then being skipped, this still adds up over the amount of the entire run here. And the same thing has not only happened on PC, but it also works on console. So both platforms can use this. On PC though, as I established earlier, thanks to the way at least currently the autosplitter calculates time, the cutscenes don't even count. So it doesn't matter when you skip them and how quickly you skip them. This glitch does not affect timing here for PC runs. Maybe they should, but I'll leave that to someone else's discussion. But for console runs, yeah, this is something that does save you time. And one of the questions, of course, that are being asked right now in the community is, well, if this preparation can be done before run even, should that be counted towards the speedrun time? When do we start timing then? If setting this whole trigger up is part of the speedrun performance, we should technically start timer when you load the save with Ocelot, right? Once you get that glitch, then you go back to the main menu, and then you can go through the entirety of the game with the state. Or should we say it's not allowed to be done from the start, and you're gonna actually have a clean run that boots up the game, you start your game as normally, you go to the point where Ocelot is, and then try to get this cutscene state here. If you get it successfully during your, well, clean start, then you can use it for the rest of the run. Or should this glitch just in its entirety be disallowed? Once again, as all of these things go, this is something that the community needs to decide together. This needs to be debated, this needs to be voted on, and if the community of runners in its entirety decide what they want to do with this, then it will be put into the rules, and then the runs can be performed according to the rules. I just want to make sure with this video at least that everyone is on the same page. This does exist. There's a glitch state in the game that automatically skips all of the new Unreal Engine 5 style cutscenes for you, and that actually effectively changes the performance of a run that you can achieve on console. Right now on PC, that's not a concern, but maybe it should be. Again, up to discussion. What I personally like about this is actually the fact that this is not the first instance where you can set up something before a run and then have its effect still happen throughout in the entirety of the game. A little bit of a history here, but even inside of the Metal Gear Solid series, you can do preparations of run before you actually start a timer. In Metal Gear Solid 1, you can load a save just when you escape the torture cell, and in Metal Gear Solid 1, for example, you can load up a save, escaping the torture cell, and then once you made it through, you got all your stuff back. You equip the chaff in your hand, and then die to the turret. When you start a new run from this state, the chaff is still being accounted for in your hand and basically gets treated as if it was in the previous state. Thanks, of course, to Metal Gear Solid 1. If you press L1 or R1, you can get your previously selected item back in your hand. So in this instance, runners can save one menu, not needing to open it and then going through the slots and then equipping the chaff, but they can use it immediately just by walking over the item now on top of the helipad instead of needing to menu through it. And because in Metal Gear Solid 1, your movement speed is actually faster with a weapon active in your hand, this immediately from frame 1 saves you time once you step over the chaff. Now, admittedly, this is a very small thing, a very small time save. The difference is just a couple of seconds, maybe even frames, depending on how quickly you can do your menu. In Metal Gear Solid 2, however, this can be bigger. Way bigger. So Metal Gear Solid 2, through any release of Metal Gear Solid 2, be it the PlayStation 2 version, the Xbox version, the PC version, the old PC version, the Master Collection version, or any of the former HD versions, all versions of Metal Gear Solid 2 have the same flaw. If you take a continue and quit out back to the main menu, normally all of your internal data gets overwritten and set to 0, except for the Pentas. Your tranquilizer that actually has been used, for example, to steady your aim when sniping, that value does not get overwritten and set back to 0. It only gets set to 0 when you take a continue and then, well, continue on. Only then, this value gets set to 0. But if you take a def and then go back to the main menu, the amount of pentas you've taken before that still is active, so the timer keeps on ticking down. Which, well, what would you normally do? Well, you go on to the fence, for example, or to the start of the 1-2 connection bridge, you eat like 200 of the pentas, which is worth like 2 hours time, take a def, go back to the main menu, and start a brand new run. And as long as you don't have a def and need to continue, the pentas value just continuously ticks down from those 2 hours until it's used up. Meaning, you can prepare your Metal Gear Solid 2 run with pentas being already used, and you don't need to actually grab it during the run, open the menu, use it, close it again, and go back again. This is once again not a massive time save, we're not talking about minutes, but still, just even saving a couple of seconds, not even getting over to the pentas to grab them, for example, on anything that is not very easy, helps a lot. And especially, for example, during the sniping segment, having no aim shake at all and not needing to constantly re-up your pentas during the sniping segment with Emma is huge. It is so comfortable. So long you don't take a def during your run. That is the condition. These are 2 instances, for example, where you can prepare a Metal Gear Solid speedrun alone, and that allows you to have an easier time going through the game. It changes from being a little bit of a time save to even a little bit more. Now with Metal Gear Solid Delta, we have yet another candidate here where this could potentially be allowed. You just load up a save at Ocelot when you just started the game, you get to the cutscene instant skip state, and then just do a couple of your runs, however many you want, because this does not go away until you close the game and restart it. So yeah, that's basically all you need to know about this glitch and this state and how it affects actually the timing method, especially on the boards. Currently, at the time of filming this on September 11th, the boards are set up so that when you do a console run, IGT is being used, the in-game time of Metal Gear Solid Delta. And even if the game would ever change to real-time as a timing method on console, instant cutscene skip glitch is still a good thing to have, especially for console runs. Who knows? We need more people doing this. But until then, my name is Nostos. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.